Welcome to Foreign Talk, exclusively from IMN. Today, we are very pleased to have with us His Excellency Ambassador Eckhard, and he's a special envoy for crisis prevention and stabilization for the German government. Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your time, and we're glad to have you with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, sir. A special envoy for crisis prevention and stabilization. Can you please tell us what are your main objectives in Iraq?
The title doesn't make reference only to Iraq. It's a function that I have with regard to other countries in the world as well. So I do travel to Africa as well, for example, because there are many countries that are undergoing crisis, where we are trying to prevent crisis from getting worse, where we're trying to stabilize situations.
Yes, sir.
But your question, of course, with regard to Iraq.
Excellent. That's absolutely correct. Yes.
I would focus on stabilization because the crisis with ISIS and so on already happened.
Yeah.
Thank God it is, in some sense, in a military sense, certainly over.
Correct.
So what is stabilization? Stabilization is the attempt to assist and intervene in a situation of crisis,
yes, sir.
to give politics, to give the political life of that country, like Iraq, a chance to set the course forward to the future and stave off violence.
All right.
That is always an ingredient with stabilization.
Okay. On your experience as a previous, I understand you were assigned as an ambassador, German ambassador in Baghdad for some time, I think a year or two. This experience also useful for you?
I was indeed ambassador in this country,
yes,
in Baghdad from 2014 to 16, so 2 years, which were very hard years for this country, and which were also tough years as an ambassador, as you can imagine. Why is that experience so valuable?
Yes,
because that was really the time where we were able to come in with civilian measures of stabilization, which followed on the heels of military action. The military action was there to defeat Daesh militarily. But once a territory is liberated, you need civilian action, you need to repair power lines, you need to restore water, you need to repair a school, for example. You need civilian action to enable the population to go back to that area. So that is actually what happened, and that's the essence of stabilization, and it is a very, very good example of that. Internationally, Iraq is considered to be perhaps the prime example. Of course, how do you measure success? If you ask if you ask the Iraqi population, and we spent the whole day in a conference which also dealt with that aspect, and yesterday had talks. Of course, the Iraqi population, to the extent I can feel it, is probably skeptical, has many problems, no doubt.
Definitely.
But the figures, the objective figures, are quite clear.
Yes.
We had 6 million internally displaced people. Now we have 1.7. It is a tough lot for those 1.7, but the others, more than 2/3 of 6 million, have returned home. I'm not saying...
It's a progress.
It's progress, and it's a clear progress, and the glass is therefore not just half full, it's more than half full. However, returning home doesn't mean there are no problems. I'm sure there are plenty of problems, and there's more work that needs to be done. Primarily by the Iraqi government, but also to some extent with the help of international organizations, countries like Germany and others.
Is it your job is working as a German government, or are you working with hand by hand with other coalition member states, or maybe working with the EU?
The whole spectrum, really.
All of them.
We do work bilaterally, and there are some programs we have with the Iraqi government, which are strictly bilateral programs. We do of course, work in an EU framework where we finance what the EU does. About 20% of everything the EU does is financed by Germany, because we're the biggest economy in Germany, so our contribution to the EU is 20% roughly. And then we have, of course, the coalition against ISIS. We're a member of that coalition, and we're co-chair in that working group stabilization. In other words, we do spend an awful lot of time, energy, and also money on stabilization.
And you have said earlier, strength being a coalition, I believe.
Yes.
The coalition itself gives you power as a
Yes,
international community.
Crises nowadays are complex crises. You have many actors, you have outside influences, you have many reasons and sources, interests. So if all of that comes together, it is very difficult as a single government, as a single state, to muster all those resources to be strong on all of these points.
Yes, sir.
But as a coalition, we can subdivide the work. Some countries have a particularly close economic relationship with Iraq. Others are politically very acceptable. You name it. I mean, there's a role for everybody. Some are big, some are small, some are too small perhaps to do the heavy lifting.
Yes, sir.
But even small fish make a good fish pie in the end if it all comes together.
You're working mainly with the minorities and other ethnicities, or what exactly you're targeting in the Iraqi society or as a whole?
When I was ambassador here, obviously the role of an ambassador is to work with the whole of Iraq. I did not have entertained contacts with the IS, obviously, but apart from that, with everybody, I think. That is minorities or non-minorities, not only people from those areas where IS attacked, but also, of course, in other areas. I went to Basra, for example. So, I mean, the function of an ambassador is tout azimut, so in all directions, with all groups of society, not only the political leadership, but also ordinary people in refugee camps and so on. In my present position, and from a point of view of stabilization, as I explained, the typical thing we do in stabilization is we combined with the military progress. Yes. Military progress was against IS, so it liberated territory. Yes. And the people to come back to that territory were the ones who had been living there. For the most parts, there were Sunni people. In some areas in the north, of course, you have all the minorities, the Christian, the Shabak, and all these minorities. So, I mean, they profited, of course, from any action that enables them to come back.
Minorities, some of them, a big portion of them, unfortunately, they were not displaced inside the country. They left the country and they went some other countries, especially Europe. They went to Germany, for example.
I mean, they were forced to leave.
Unfortunately, because, But that also the demographic changes, obviously, as far as their areas and neighborhoods they were living in, did impact that areas. What's your take on that?
It's, I think, primarily an issue for the Iraqis to deal with. I mean, we do not do engineering of populations. This is not our business. I mean, we said, okay, we will do what we can as a coalition, as Germany, to enable those people who were driven from their homes by force, by threat, to be able to return. And that presumes that it's the same people who had to leave that come back, and not other people, which would be demographic engineering, changing the... However, you're right that some parts of the population, some minorities, many left, perhaps because they felt that there is no future for them in Iraq. And that is indeed a shame, because Iraq is an example of a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, tolerant state. And I think we would look at Iraq as a positive example of that, really. And it is therefore a shame if that is lost or diminished in the process. I'm afraid the reality is it is diminished. There are fewer minorities nowadays in Iraq than there used to be. Unfortunately, indeed. It's not I mean, that's not what we want. It's none of our doing. And I think the main action, the circumstances, but the main action is perhaps, if at all, it's possible with the Iraqi government to make sure that conditions for, say, Christians and other minorities to come back are there, and that they feel safe. That's
always you're saying Iraq, because I will give you the outside voice. The people is concerned, especially about their German work. They mainly focusing on liberated areas and Kurdistan cities. But you mainly always repeatedly saying that's Iraq. So your focus on all cities of Iraq? All right, all right. I just want to make it clear for everyone out there. Yeah.
Basra is, of course, an important city in Iraq, but it hasn't been liberated. On the other hand, people of Basra have given their lives, have given their health, in many cases sacrificed their health to fight against IS. So that it's not as clear-cut. But we made a point indeed that some of our assistance is specifically focused at those areas which are liberated. And I think there's a political rationale really, because you want people to go back. But the focus, our focus, has always been the whole of Iraq and the integrity of Iraq. And while I was here as ambassador, as well as in the last 3 years, there's always been the argument with the Kurdish region in the north. Yes, we have a general consulate in Erbil.
Yes.
So we have a good relationship with the Kurdish region, but as a Kurdish region of Iraq.
Part of Iraq.
And we use our influence, and we have used our influence and our standing there to emphasize that, always. It is also true that a lot of the humanitarian assistance in particular focused on the north.
Yes, sir.
That is because about 50% of IDPs were in the north. 50% of those 6 million.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yes, extremely a lot.
And so there is an objective reason why a lot of the help focused there.
All right.
Also, our military cooperation,
in
particular in terms of arms which were shipped from Germany, focused on the north. However, this was not a clandestine operation, and I was here to oversee it.
Yes, sir.
So this was an official operation to support the North in their fight against ISIS. And remember, I mean, that's where the fighting started.
Correct.
And that is also where the IS was pushed back, not least with German Milan anti-tank rockets.
Correct.
So, I mean, there is an objective story to this, and this was always handled in full transparency with the Iraqi government. I talked to the defense minister, I talked to the prime minister about this, and they received clear information from us, and they inspected at the airport which weapon systems were going up north. And it was only with their consent, with the consent of the central government, that this would happen.
All right.
So there is, I think, a very clean, a very transparent story. And there are objective reasons why things were handled as they were handled.
Are you working as with the government, Iraqi government only? Are you working with other parties like NGOs and anybody out there, and mixing with the community directly? Maybe United Nations, for example, or any other parties?
We have various ways of working. I mean, obviously, you have to imagine the representation of Germany in Baghdad, so the embassy.
Yes, sir.
Used to be a medium-sized German embassy, but at the time of internal strife, at the time when we had to fear being the victim of some attack, it was reduced to the minimum. So it was, in my time, it was a medium-sized embassy, but with a minimalist staff.
Yes, sir.
So that alone tells you that we ourselves, as individuals, as diplomats, were unable to do all that work. We have to use agencies, various agencies, to do the work. The biggest and the most important one for stabilization to this very day is UNDP. So we worked an awful lot with UNDP.
All right.
But I told you at the beginning when you asked bilateral or multilateral that we also had bilateral action. Our main bilateral actor in that sense, organization that translates our money into projects and action on the ground is GIZ, which is fairly well known in this country and the world over as an organization that just does that, projects of that type. There are also, it's not an NGO, no, it's an organization which is, I would say, semi-government. It's not an NGO. We also work we also work individually with small NGOs sometimes, but it's very work intensive. You need a lot of personnel to talk to them, to and so on. We had a couple of Iraqi NGOs, for example, those looking after the rights of women in Iraq from civil society. Like we had, yes, we had an organization that stood up for human rights lawyers, which we supported. We worked with Parliament in some of the rule of law reforms. So those are just examples. But very often and very typically, all the embassies use other actors and instruct other actors, give them money, and see to it and check that they are doing the kind of job we want them to do.
All right. In your personal view, you think there is any obstacles you're facing? I'm sure there is. But
there are plenty of obstacles.
All right.
I wouldn't say any, there are plenty of obstacles.
Okay.
And all my job as ambassador, 80% of my time was taken up with fighting against the obstacles.
All right. Can you put us in the picture kindly, please?
These obstacles are on all sides. They are not just, as you would expect, of course, Iraqi obstacles in the sense that the situation in this country was dire. And
yes,
I mean, don't have to explain to your listeners what the situation was like from 14 to 16. So it was difficult, objectively. Then there are difficulties to do with governance. I mean, the government, we did cooperate very closely with the government, but not with all parts of government. You have certain entry points where you cooperate and where you find able partners and that are convinced that together you're doing the right thing. As we say in our parlance, we speak of ownership. So Iraqi ownership, very important, very important. We wouldn't do things without Iraqi ownership, really, because it doesn't work in the long run. So we had partners who had that ownership. But these partners, to this very day, sometimes have the difficulty of needing to translate what they want to do for the country into practical realities. Implementation is the problem in Iraq. Implementation is the problem in so many fields. And that used to be the case, and to this very day it is the case. We discussed it just in this meeting that I mentioned. We discussed this question of implementation. What can we do to strengthen implementation? What can the government do to strengthen implementation? Because I know from my experience here that at the top of the government, I'm sure there were many good intentions, but I'm also equally sure that many of those good intentions were not seen through to the various corners of Iraq, where implementation was difficult because of the military situation, because of the social situation, because of lack of money, because of corruption, and so on and so forth. I mean, there are many reasons, and the Iraqi population, of course, knows what the reasons are. There's also, I just want to mention, to be fair, there is a bureaucracy in our country, in Germany. And I sometimes had to fight with my own bureaucracy. And I say, no, we need to do this. Yeah, but there's not this and this. We need to do this. So there's this kind of argument also going on all the time. When you're in a country like Iraq, in such a tense situation, you have to convince your people back home that it's worthwhile putting your money here. It doesn't necessarily come naturally.
Germany is also involved in any kind of rehabilitation for the people, and I mean, through the Iraqi government helping, or any kind of rehabilitation, especially the new generation have been, unfortunately been raised and took all the thoughts of the, extremism in different aspects. There is kind of programs, any involvement? Yeah,
we are acutely aware of these issues. Yes, because we move around in Iraq, we listen to what Iraqis tell us, of course. Yes, we know that a conflict like the one you've seen through leaves its scars on society and on individuals. Yes. It is not. It is this word rehabilitation and also reconciliation. I would use. Yeah, I mean they're close. They're not the same, but there's the closeness. After such a conflict, you need time, you need to be able to talk to each other, you need processes that enable you to digest the conflict and to heal the wounds. What can a friendly government like the German government do? Yes, you can perhaps buy time, you can we support organizations that are specialized in reconciliation, for example, but it is not so easy from the outside. It is a process which has to have its roots in Iraq. You cannot, as a foreigner, tell two Iraqis, okay, you now talk to each other, and then after a while you'll like each other again.
Yes,
no, this is something which essentially has to happen among Iraqis within your society. We can perhaps here and there improve the conditions, enable certain things with some money, with some assistance, with some good advice, with some mediator. All of these things we have tried to some extent, but it's difficult. I'll give you an example. I even had within my office at the embassy a meeting between 3 Shia representatives and 3 Sunni representatives.
We don't use it no more, Shia and Sunni.
And it didn't happen because I invited them and said, please come to me.
Yes, sir.
They came to me
Yes,
and
sir.
said, can you please hold that meeting
Okay.
in your office? Because they wanted this impartiality of, the,
Yes.
of an embassy, a friendly embassy,
All right.
and drink German tea.
I love it myself.
So there they were sitting, 6
Yes, sir.
people.
Yes, sir.
What happened?
Yes, sir.
They started, the 2 groups started arguing amongst themselves to an extent that I, at some point, then said, I'm sorry, but that's enough.
Yeah.
I'm not a playground, I'm not a kind
Yeah.
of,
Yeah,
it's not a football pitch.
Yes, yes.
You need to sort out yourselves before such a talk makes sense.
All right.
So I'm just giving this, I'm not
Yes.
saying this is the whole process. This is an example at some point in the process. An example both for our willingness in principle to play a certain role, but also for reasons why we felt we should not delve too deeply into that.
Yes.
The UN actually
Yes, sir.
has a role in that, and it has the lead role. And I know from all the discussions I had with the UN Special Representative, Jan Kubiš at the time, that he was also active in that field, but he also met with the same obstacles and was careful, therefore. Because the common realization on our side was this is something the Iraqis got to be ready for it.
Yes, sir.
Only then can it work.
Okay.
But now is the time, I think, to...
We'll take a short break and I'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Mr. Ambassador, before the break we were talking about your role in stabilization, and we are highly appreciated everything you're doing. Basically, we are very much looking forward for more help from the German because of their history, basically, because of your country being through war, and there are some unfortunate radical movement there, and you are working towards solving the problems there. So if we can somehow create a free society, I won't say there is no terrorism yet in Germany, hopefully never, but a free society of this violence, and people can coexist between them. How can we use the German, if we can use the German example, somehow in Iraq?
While I was here,
Yes, sir.
working in Iraq, I met with these various positive ideas about Germany.
Yes.
And indeed, there were partly that after the war, we managed to rebuild Germany very quickly.
Absolutely, that's a great example. That's a fact.
Secondly, after unification of Germany, more recent, this growing together also meant there was a very active economic and societal process of growing together. So we have that recent experience.
There is integration also between the people, I think.
Integration between people of different traditions at that point in time. Quite frankly, what helped as well, the German position in Iraq, that we are not a colonial country, so we had no colonial history in your country. And finally, we were not part of 2003. So we had lots of factors which meant that the Iraqi people, the government, had a very easy and positive attitude towards us. What kind of advice are you able to give as a friendly government that holds, say, some sympathy and authority in this country? again, you have to be careful because, I mean, Germany is Germany and Iraq is Iraq.
Absolutely. I mean,
And even if you try to understand Iraq, well, you have your limitations as a foreigner.
Every
But
society is unique in a way,
yes.
I believe. Yes.
What I would say is this. I mean, Iraq, in the context of the Middle East, is special in that it has a working democratic tradition, if you want to. Changes of government without killing everybody, the old government for the new government to come in without, yeah. So there's a democratic, it's happened happened several times now.
Yes.
It's perhaps not always smooth, but it has happened.
Yes.
And without violence.
Correct.
That is very positive, and it is not widespread if you look around.
Yes, sir.
And the second thing is, it was also mentioned in our meeting today, and rightly so, that you have a very pluralistic press in your country.
Yes, sir.
You have all sorts of views being published.
Correct.
And there's no obvious limitation really, and those things are two very positive things which I always emphasized as positive, as something we support.
Yes,
we also had programs for journalists, Iraqi journalists, to come to Germany, for example, to support this pluralism and so on. Another element which I offered as a valuable German experience, which might be of use to Iraq,
Yes, sir.
is our federalism.
Yes, sir. That's
This is a bit problematic because at the time when you were fighting for your integrity as a country, many people didn't want to hear about federalism because it sounded a little bit like different parts flying off.
Correct.
Becoming independent.
Correct.
This is never what we mean when we talk of federalism. What we mean is that you have an integral country, like now, Iraq, but you do have differentiation and the possibility for different parts of the country within that unity of the country to develop along slightly different tastes and paths. And to enable such pluralism within your country is normally a source of strength because it enables you to accommodate these differences under a common roof. Most parts of the country, I think, will accept that it's good to have a foreign policy for the whole country and not for this country, bit of the country or that, but to have a defense policy for the whole country, to have some, I don't know, some general rules and cultural policy perhaps for the whole country.
Yes, sir.
But then below that,
Yes,
you
sir.
can have a very nice opera in that part of the country and a beautiful concert in that part of the country. It doesn't tear the country apart.
Complete each other, basically.
Yeah.
They will complete each other.
Yeah. So that is a model which we have in Germany
Yes, sir.
very successfully,
Yes, it
and
is.
it is a model which it's a kind of export model. It is something which is possible to implement with variations in many countries that are varied in their composition.
You have mentioned earlier, Mr. Ambassador, that you have working with the GIZ and other organizations to achieve your objectives. There is anything on the ground have been achieved, according to what you know, that the people can say, listen, this is a contribution of the German, directly or indirectly were involved in it? There is anything, any examples you can give us?
Well, I mean, you asked about bilateral and multilateral cooperation.
Yes, sir. Yes,
now, the multilateral usually doesn't have a German flag on it because it's multilateral.
Yes, it's part of a group.
So I don't want to pride myself of anything, but I think within the activities of UNDP, for example, we played a big role as a donate, as one of the.
How much you donated? May I ask? If you, it's up to you. I mean,
these games with figures are always a bit complicated. But what I can tell you, for example, is that if you take everything together,
yes, sir.
humanitarian aid as well as stabilization aid,
Yes, sir.
Germany alone in the years since 2014 gave something like 1.7 billion euros. This is like almost $2 billion US. That is a huge amount of money, I think, for one single country, Germany, to give to another single country, Iraq. As I said, it is a mixture of things. It's humanitarian help, which is also essential. Remember, for example, when before Mosul was stormed and retaken from the IS, about 1 million people, 1 million people, had to be evacuated out of Mosul and had to be kept alive. How do you keep 1 million people whom you evacuate alive? I mean, that was a huge operation, a humanitarian UN operation. But I mean, it has to be financed, and we financed a good bit of that. So I mean, this is how we this is how these figures come together. So it's a lot of money. But you asked, where is there a German project somewhere? This map was given to me by the mayor of Sinjar at the time. Why did he give that map to me? He gave it to me because he was thankful and he wanted to thank me with the map. He visited in the embassy here because the GIZ, with German money, a German organization with German money, had been the first on the ground in Sinjar to offer help. And what they did is they offered a big package, what we call a starter package, consisting of lorries, trucks, excavator, water tanks, things like that, generators, the things you need when you very first put up your existence, when you resettle. With water tanks and excavators and these kind of heavy equipment, which you need to restart your existence, basically. It sticks out in my mind because the mayor of Sinjar was really so grateful because this was the first help. The first help is always the magic. There's something magic about that, you know, after a period of desperate need. So that's one element. Another is that we have offered to the Iraqi government a credit line of 500 million euros, which is a lot of money, for projects. Projects to be undertaken in the liberated areas. These projects are still being planned and gradually being executed, because 500 million you don't spend in a week if it's supposed to be done well. The MOU covering this, memorandum of understanding, was negotiated between the then finance minister of Iraq and myself as ambassador at the end of the middle of 2016. Then it took a year to the middle of 2017 to have the actual contracts between KfW, the bank, and the Iraqi government, and now the first projects in Mosul in particular are being implemented. These are projects where you re-establish something. You don't build a new power plant. What you do is you re-establish a power line. You re-establish a burst water main, for example. That's what you do with that money, or you clean the water in Nineveh, in Mosul, in other areas.
Kind of maintenance in a way?
Well, re-establishing the functioning infrastructure is the point. It's not completely new infrastructure. The point is that there was infrastructure, but it's destroyed. It's no longer working. There are parts missing, whatever.
Yes, sir.
You re-establish that. And on a wider scale, bridges, for example, which have been damaged.
They're damaged,
Things like that. We don't build a new bridge with that. We use the bridge that was there, try to re-establish it.
All right, excellent.
So that is happening with an emphasis on Mosul and Nineveh, because that's where it's most needed, but there's also in other liberated areas.
Excellent.
It will go on for another, I'm sure, a year or two, 3, this program.
Okay.
So that's something specifically German, because it's bilateral.
If you're looking for German, that's specifically German. Okay. I'm extremely grateful for your time, sir. I know your time is very busy and very hectic schedule you have ahead of you. If you have a final word for our viewers, please go ahead.
I think I would like to summarize for your viewers
a
little bit what we did today.
Yes, sir.
Because to me that was important.
Yes, sir.
After 5 years, this is the first time that the working group of stabilization met in Iraq, in Baghdad.
Yes.
This group has met in Washington, in Amman, in Berlin, many other places. It is the brain cell that has always worked in the background, not visible for Iraq, for the Iraqi population. And it's the mastermind that has planned the stabilization cooperation with Iraq. And it's a great event for this to happen here in Baghdad today. It shows, first of all, that the situation has changed, that there's greater security now. When you come in from the airport, I was surprised to see how beautiful Baghdad can be when the walls have been taken away. And so it's an important symbol, quite apart from everything else. A second point I want to make, though, is that in the course of these discussions, there was a common thread which was woven through these discussions.
Yes, sir.
And the common thread was this, that what we need is for the Iraqi government, for the Iraqi political elite, for the whole country really,
Yes, sir.
to assume more ownership of their own destiny.
Yes, sir.
Because we're seeing now the window of opportunity for stabilization, which is a short-term
Yes, sir.
measure to stave off violence, to give politics room.
Yes, sir.
This window of opportunity is closing. Because we, the countries of the coalition, have given a lot of money, a lot of effort, a lot of ideas, a lot of advice. But I think the fight is over, violence has been quelled, and what's needed now is reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
And reconstruction is something where this country, Iraq,
Yes, sir.
is the prime actor. You need, as a country, you need to make yourself attractive to private industry. You need reforms, you need a management culture which enables private firms to work well in your country for the benefit of the firms and the country. That's really the way to go, that's the way where I see the future of Iraq. But as I said, a lot of the responsibility rests with Iraqis themselves. And I hope that everybody, in spite of perhaps difficult living circumstances here and there, I'm sure, that everybody, even in those circumstances, understands that that is what is now required. Initiative and confidence, self-confidence,
Yes, sir.
to take the destiny in your own hands.
We're very grateful for your time. Thank you once again, Mr. Ambassador. And thank you also. That was our interview with His Excellency Mr. Ambassador Eckhard Preveza, and he's a special envoy for crisis prevention and stabilization. Thank you. I will see you next time.